You are listening to episode 160 of the Autism Mom Coach podcast, the IEP Trap. Welcome to the Autism Mom Coach podcast. I am your host, Lisa Candera. I am a lawyer, a life coach, and most importantly, I am the full-time single mother of a teenager with autism. In this podcast, I am going to share with you the tools and strategies you need so you can fight like hell for your child without burning out. Let's get to it. Has your child's school team ever recommending reducing supports because your child is doing so well? Don't fall for this IEP trap. This is going to be a two-part episode. In part one, I am going to talk to you about what the IEP trap is and how you can avoid it. And in part two, I am going to take a deep dive into one of the number one reasons I believe that this IEP trap happens so often for children with autism, and that is autism masking. Let me lay out how I usually see this happening. It's either in a social media post or I hear it from a client during a session, and the parent is so excited because their child is progressing. They're doing so well. In fact, so well that the school is saying, hey, maybe it's time to pull back some of those supports. Now, let me be clear. If this decision comes after extensive data collection, multiple observations across different environments, and a carefully structured transition plan with metrics and data for success, that is amazing and genuinely amazing. Congratulations. But if it's not, I want you to hear this warning. Look before you leap, because what looks like a victory might actually be setting your child up for failure. I just remember how my heart just felt like it was bursting when my son's fifth grade teacher called to tell me that my son was one of the most behaved and regulated children in class, and how he was so polite and welcoming of other students, even though he was also a new student, how pro-social he was with his new classmates. Everything she said was just everything we had been working for, we had been hoping for, and it felt like it was finally happening. So if this is what's happening to you, take in all of that victory and celebrate it. But just know this progress does not mean that supports aren't needed. It means the supports are working. I want you to learn from my experience, because the first time I heard this was in a moment of crisis. My son was 13 years old and he was just being admitted to an inpatient hospital for children with autism. I was trying to explain to the doctor that the kid he was seeing was not the kid that anybody else had been seeing prior to this. I went on to tell him about how well he was doing in school, how he had learned how to ski, how he was interacting appropriately with other kids. He was making friends. He was even competing in front of the whole school in a GEOB contest. That's how well he was doing. That's how confident he was. And this felt like a huge fall. In fact, he was doing so well that the IEP team was talking to me about scaling back his supports. And this is when the doctor said to me, that is a huge mistake, and I see it all of the time. Schools see a child, and he said, particularly children with quote unquote high functioning autism, they see them doing better and they see this as a sign to remove the supports. He said, in reality, this is a time to double down on the support because it's working. This is all to say that I completely understand the temptation to start to scale back when your child is doing better, because it feels like they're just moving closer and closer to more independence and everything you have been working for. But here's the thing, there is a much bigger story about what is happening behind the scenes that could be impacting this decision that has nothing to do with your child's well-being. I am not saying any one of these factors is the reason or isn't the reason, but there are contributing factors that you need to be aware of. And that first factor is money. Plain and simple, it costs a lot of money to educate a child with special needs, up to 3 times as much as a general education student. And where does that money come from? Although Congress is authorized to fund up to 40% of a special ed student's per pupil cost, they have never even come close. The closest they've ever come to that is About 20%, that was several years ago. In the last few years, the average has been 13%. So, where does the rest of that money come from? It comes from your state and it comes from your local school district. This is why I always tell parents that IEPs are local in nature. Yes, the federal law says this, but what actually gets provided and implemented is all about the state that you were in, the local school district, and how well they're able to make up for the fact that they're completely underfunded by the federal government. So you can see how when a child starts to show progress and they look like they're doing well, that the schools might think, hey, this is a place where we can stop providing a resource to this child and perhaps provide it to another child who's not getting the resources because of the underfunding. I say it this way because look, I don't think anybody got into education to sit back and deny children services. I don't think that's what's happening at all. I think that schools are facing huge constraints and have to make difficult, terrible decisions. And they're not going to tell you that with any transparency because they can't. But that is what's going on behind the scenes. Second, there is a tremendous special ed teacher shortage in the United States. This predated COVID, but it got so much worse since COVID. So, in practical terms, what does this mean? The schools don't have the appropriate level of personnel required to provide the services that our children are entitled to receive. And when you have a shortage of special ed teachers and a high demand for those services, it's not unrealistic to believe that when a school sees a child who looks like they're doing well, that they might see an opportunity to scale back in order to stretch their very limited resources. The third contributing factor that I believe goes into schools removing services prematurely, especially for children with autism, is autism masking. And I think that autism masking not only fools schools, it fools parents all of the time. It certainly fooled me, especially because what my child was presenting is exactly what I wanted to see. So, what is masking? As we all know, with a child with autism, nothing really is as it appears on the surface. And this can be the same with progress. What looks like progress might not be real progress, it might be masking. The exhausting process of your child hiding their autistic traits so that they can fit in or avoid a negative consequence, anything from a reprimand to being made fun of by other children. So your child might seem fine at school. We've all heard this from school staff at some point or another. And in ways, it can really feel like an accusation when you're going to the school and saying, hey, what's going on in school? Because when my son comes home, they fall apart. And you get the response, well, I don't know what happens at your house, but they're fine in school. There's a reason for that. Your child is likely masking. And when they get home to their safe place, they let that go. And so you see everything that's been being held in. This means that at school, your child may appear very socially engaged. I get how difficult it would be to see a child day to day who looks like they're thriving and doing well, and to be confused when you hear this information from the parents because it doesn't line up with what you are seeing with your own two eyes, and vice versa for the parents. I remember my son telling me that he was feeling lonely in school. And I was really concerned about this because he was at a new school, and I wanted to make sure that his team was keeping an eye on this and working to integrate him with his new peers. So when I brought this up to the team, they all looked at me like with these doe eyes of like, what are you talking about? Ben sits at the lunch table with the boys every day. He is participating in playing outside. He seems to be joking around with the kids. Like they did not see it. And so I raised this with Ben, and he said to me, and my son loves a metaphor. So he said, Mom, you know how when you see somebody who's strong and they lift up a weight and it doesn't look like it's hard at all for them? I said, Yeah. So he says to me, It might not look hard to you, but you don't know how they're feeling inside. And this is what he was experiencing. People were seeing something from the outside, but it wasn't reflecting what was going on inside because he was masking. So, this is all to say that your child's progress may not and probably is not the only reason that the school is suggesting a scaling back in their services. You need to be aware of this because when services and supports are pulled back prematurely, there are consequences and they can be long term or longer term than you would like. And the first is that regression can happen really quickly. All of a sudden, a child who is sitting at the lunch table is sitting by themselves. A student who was regulated in the classroom begins to have minor outbursts, or that a child that was successfully going to school every day starts to refuse to get on the bus. And all of a sudden, you're seeing your child who was quote unquote doing so well, they seem to be regressing or losing skills they had already mastered. Second, their anxiety and frustration skyrocket. For my son, this looked like constant stomach aches and headaches before school, daily meltdowns at home because he wasn't sure if he understood instructions properly, and he didn't want to ask the teacher because he didn't want to be that kid always asking for clarification. He was confused about what was going on in school with his peers. He didn't know if they liked him, and he was just having so much anxiety inside of himself. Number three, once you let go of services, it is an uphill battle to get them back. They don't just say, oh, here you go. No, there's going to be lots of let's wait and see, let's give it more time. You might have to get an attorney or an advocate involved. And even then, you're not guaranteed to get those services back. And even when you do, how much time has already elapsed while your child is struggling? Number four, and I cannot stress this enough because I saw it in my own son and I see it in so many of the children of my clients, especially as the kids get older, is that their self esteem gets damaged. They go from suddenly being able to fit in and keep up to not being able to. And it's confusing and it's scary to them. And they begin to internalize it as there's something that's wrong with me. And a lot of times, this is at the intersection of middle school and puberty, where two things happen. One, your child might be becoming more aware of the differences between themselves and their peers. And two, that gap starts to become a canyon, especially when it comes to the social piece of it. The way that the kids communicate so quickly, the way that these different social groups form, and the way they interact with one another. You go from everybody being kumbaya of elementary school to division and fracture. And that's really confusing and disruptive and sometimes traumatizing, really, to any kid. But then when you add autism to that, it just intensifies it all the more. And so, what does this lead to? So often, autistic burnout. This isn't just tiredness or frustration. Autism burnout is a serious condition that researchers are just beginning to understand. This could look like complete physical, mental, and emotional exhaustion. You might see a loss of skills that had been mastered for years. You're going to see things like increased sensory sensitivities. I'll never forget, my son all of a sudden went from a kid who could go to a rock concert, quite literally, to one that was wearing headphones because of the sensory overload. There's a decreased ability to tolerate social situations because they're no longer able to mask or to fake it till you make it. This is autism burnout. So, what can you do to make sure that this doesn't happen for your child? Demand data, hard numbers, not observations, not opinions. You want data that demonstrates that your child can consistently perform without whatever support they are suggesting. Don't accept vague statements like they seem fine and everyone's so impressed and they're doing so well. Demand data. Second, and this is really important, take your own data. The school only sees your child for a fraction of the day, and that is the fraction of the day that they are most incentivized to mask. They don't see your child after school. They don't see them before school. They don't see them on Sunday night. Take data. How is your child feeling? Are they having a lot of anxiety? Did they stop doing things that they previously enjoyed doing? This is all important for painting a full picture of your child, not just the piece that the school sees. When your child is likely on their quote unquote best behavior, i.e., masking. Third, put everything in writing. This is a rule of thumb no matter what is going on. Unless it's in writing, it didn't happen. And this especially goes for the IEP meetings. And so, any concerns that you have, you want to put those in writing before you even walk in the door with your parent concern letter. That is how your concerns get incorporated into the official record for your child. Number four, if your child is approaching that space where you're like, maybe it is time, request a trial period and not a cliff. This means that you test it out. Maybe you're fading out an aid or occupational therapy, whatever it is. Get a very clear written plan in place that guarantees that services stay in place during the interim and that they are not removed. So that if it turns out that, hey, this kid was actually relying on this much more than we realized, you don't have to go through the heartache of trying to claw those services back. And then finally, consider hiring an expert, either an education advocate or an attorney that is familiar with the players, that has a track record of representing parents in your school district, because you really do want someone who knows the players or is respected by the players. And I will tell you that when you have an advocate or an attorney, things are different. As an ER psychiatrist once told me, I always suspected and believed this just from being an attorney that this would be true. And I know that when a professional who is educated in all of the laws and all of the practices is involved, they're going to get a different reception than mom and dad, even if mom and dad are attorneys, by the way. But I'll never forget hearing this from an ER psychiatrist who was evaluating Ben, and she was really concerned about Ben's level of anxiety in school. She asked me if I had an education advocate, to which I responded, yes. And by the way, I didn't hire my education advocate until we were in full on crisis. It worked out. I don't recommend that, but that's what happened. And when I told the psychiatrist that, she said, good, because schools tend to sit up a little bit straighter in those IEP meetings when you bring an advocate or an attorney. However, you can always bring another person with you. You can explore opportunities to get advocates that are free of charge and a great place for you to vet potential professionals in addition to your local community. Because again, you really want to know who plays in your backyard. You can go to the website for the Council of Parents, Attorneys, and Advocates. And from that site, you're able to learn more about your rights under the education laws. And you're also able to search for advocates and attorneys in your area. So demand data, take your own data, put everything in writing, request a trial period, not a cliff, and hire expert help if needed. But finally, and this is the most important thing, trust yourself. You are the expert on your child. No one at that IEP table, no matter how many certifications or letters after their name they have, outranks you. They see snapshots, they see data points, you see your entire child. Now, I know for some it could be intimidating to push back against the quote unquote experts or professionals, but I want you to remember what this means for you is that you need to let go of being liked. You're not at the IEP table to make friends. You are there to get a job done for your child. So you have to grow your ability to feel uncomfortable, to ask the hard questions, to have the difficult conversations. Here's the reality. The people around this table are temporary members of your child's team. You are the permanent member. And as the permanent member who sees your child year after year, day after day across multiple environments, you know them the best. So if your gut is telling you, no, this is too fast, they still need these supports, trust yourself. All right, that is it for today's episode. Stay tuned for next week where I do a deep dive on autism masking and how it may be showing up for your child at school and at home, and steps that you can take as a parent to support your child through this. And as always, if you are struggling to step up and step into your role as the expert on your child, you want to stop second guessing yourself, you would have more confidence in the decisions that you make for your child. This is something that I can help you with in my one-on-one coaching program. The first step is scheduling your one-on-one consultation, which is free of charge. You can do this right now in the show notes. All right, everyone, I will talk to you next week. Thanks for listening to the Autism Mom Coach. If you are ready to apply the principles you are learning in these episodes to your life, it is time to schedule a consultation call with me. Podcasts are great, but the ahas are fleeting. Real change comes from application and implementation, and this is exactly what we do in my one-on-one coaching program. To schedule your consultation, go to my website, theautismmomcoach.com, work with me, and take the first step to taking better care of yourself so that you can show up as the parent you want to be for your child with autism.